Yeah.
Welcome everyone to the July ordinary meeting of the Norfolk Island Regional Council, being held in the council chambers on Norfolk Island, commencing at 2 p.m. I'll start by asking the General Manager to recite the statement of respect. Mr. General Manager, please be upstanding.
The Norfolk Island Regional Council promotes a climate of respect for all. We will endeavour to inspire in our community shared civic pride by valuing and protecting our unique culture and environment, both natural and built, for the current and future generations. We, the Administrator and the staff of Norfolk Island Regional Council, undertake to act with honesty and integrity, to conduct ourselves in a way that engenders trust and confidence in the decisions we make and the actions we take on behalf of the Norfolk Island community. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this island.
Please remain standing while I read the list of condolences for this meeting. Sydney Alfred Moore Cooper, affectionately known as Coop, who passed away on Saturday the 4th of June at Royal Brisbane Hospital. Phyllis Joyce Parker, who passed away on Saturday the 18th of June at the Norfolk Island Hospital. Glenn Charles Blucher passed away on Thursday the 30th of June at the Norfolk Island Hospital. And lastly, Elaine Kate Edward, affectionately known as Miss Norfolk, who passed away yesterday, Tuesday the 5th of July. And please remain standing while we observe a minute of respect. Thank you. Please be seated. Mr. General Manager, are there any apologies for this meeting?
No, there is not.
And are there any disclosures of interest?
No, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. That brings me to item 5, which is the confirmation of the minutes of the council meeting held on the 1st of June 2022. I have personally checked the minutes and I resolve that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 1st of June 2022 be received, taken as read and confirmed. And I'll move now to item 6, which is public access. And this is just to notify the community that the public access sessions for the July council meeting were held yesterday, commencing at 3 p.m. There were 6 presentations made to me in public access, and there were 15 or 20 odd people sitting in the gallery listening to that public access session. So I'd like to thank those people who took the opportunity to address me in public access yesterday. At item 7, I note there is no administrator's minute. So that brings us to reports from committees. Item 8.1 is the minutes of the Youth Advisory Committee meeting held on the 19th of May 2022. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is the record of the minutes of the meeting held on 19th of May for the Youth Advisory Committee, which is the 4th of Council's advisory committees, which is consisting of 12 members. At their first meeting, the discussion topics were 4G telecommunications packages, services at the public library and the provision of an outdoor fitness station and public water fountains, as well as the development of a skate park. Happy to take any questions from that meeting.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I noticed that there's a recommendation for council to support the creation of a student mobile 4G plan. I'm not sure that I understand the cost implications of that. Can you enlighten me on that, please?
Yeah, the students wanted to probably push more into the data side of things rather than SMS. It's just a generational thing. They're not using the 100 SMS local things or the 100 minutes talk time. It's all mostly data. So it's a specific thing aimed at a specific age group. And so they've asked us to look into that. We're going to have to investigate and see whether we can do that, but that seems a reasonable request to me.
So is it your understanding that that could be done within the cost of whatever is paid for those plans?
Yeah, it's possible, but we just have to analyse it to see if we can make it happen. But we would try and make it so that it would be a focus towards the students.
Thank you. And the proposal for extending services at the public library, has that been costed?
Yeah, in the report, I think it shows that it would be met within the existing budgets of the library to have a different set of hours so it would allow the students to access it. So it would fit within existing budgets.
All right, and the proposal is for a trial arrangement initially to assess its value. Okay, thank you, Mr. General Manager. I resolve that the minutes of the Youth Advisory Committee be received and the recommendations therein be adopted. 2, that council support the creation of a student mobile 4G plan. 3, that council commit to trialling a study session at the public library for 9 weeks during term 3. And I'll add a final part to this resolution 4, that the Youth Advisory Committee be thanked for its valuable advice to council. And I'll move to item 9.1. Which is the report on the delivery plan 2022 to 2026 and operational plan 2022 to 2023. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. This report is recommending adoption of the draft delivery program and the operational plan, noting the public submissions received and recommending a number of changes to these draft documents, which I'll now address. The summary of changes that we would propose for your consideration, Mr. Administrator, are as follows. That the rate increase will now be 25% increase in the previous year. Rates income will be $1.625 million from the levy, with a $200,000 contribution from the department as a subsidy, meaning the overall revenue budget will remain at $1.8 million for this line item. 2, a contribution by the department of $800,000 towards waste management charge. This will mean the waste management charge will increase by $200,000 from the previous year, or a 25% increase on the previous year. The rate subcategorisation will be used as a differential split to apply the waste charges. 3, following representations from the Accommodation and Tourism Association, it is recommended that $100 be added to each residential property, small, medium, large, for the waste management charge, and the total be deducted from the per unit charge that was in the draft proposal on the accommodation subcategories. 4, vacant residential properties will receive a 25% discount on waste management charge. And 5, Commonwealth properties such as the hospitals, school and Carver properties will attract a waste management charge on a similar basis to the rating subcategory they would otherwise fall under. The changes that I've just run through there are from what was advertised on the 24th of May, and it can be summarised as this: a 25% increase in notional rating income from 22-23 year, not the 38 that was proposed. However, subcategorisations will be applied, meaning individual rate notices will change from the previous year. This will also produce an 81% reduction for accommodation units in waste management charge, a 44% reduction for all other business commercial properties in waste management charges, a 44% reduction for farmland in waste management charges, and a 23% reduction for residential in waste management charges. The council surplus will remain at 500,000, and that's important, Mr Administrator, to maintain for a number of years to improve our cash position that was exhausted in December 2020 when we received a $3 million bailout. Council needs to create surpluses for a number of years to improve our cash position. And that's about it, Mr Administrator.
Thank you, Mr General Manager. You've mentioned a series of recommendations which are contained in the body of the report. And I just note for the understanding of people watching this meeting today that those recommendations seem to be picked up in the recommendations for my consideration that commence on page 34 of the agenda. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. I'm going to make some comments, as I did last year, in relation to the operational plan and the revenue policy contained in the plan. I'm going to go into considerable detail to give people an understanding of the rationale behind my decision that I'll be making this afternoon very shortly. Because I want to cover this in considerable detail, my preamble to the resolution is going to be quite lengthy. So I just ask everybody to sit back and please relax and bear with me while I deliver this statement. At this time last year, I said that council was in a difficult position, trying to rectify the parlous financial circumstances it found itself in by the end of 2020, whilst not overburdening local residents and visitors, so that it can recover sufficiently to meet the challenges that lie ahead. Since then, rectification measures have been underway, and these are in further evidence in the integrated planning and reporting documents under consideration today. Achieving the objectives of NERC's 21 to 26 Community Strategic Plan, the Norfolk Island 9-point action plan, and implementing the recommendations of the Nexia and Grassroots external audit findings remain high priorities. But most pressing is the need to respond to the overall conclusions contained in the final report of the public inquiry into the Norfolk Island Regional Council 2021. That report reflected on the unwillingness of the then elected council to address the revenue shortfalls that happened each year from NERC's inception in 2016, despite their power to do so. The draft 2022-2023 operational plan and revenue policy charts a course for council to address these revenue shortfalls. I want to highlight some of the Public Inquiry Commissioner's conclusions about council as a starting point for understanding the need to expand its revenue in response to well understood financial challenges. Commissioner McNally stated, and I'm quoting here from the Commissioner, in Chapter 5 of her report, the evidence focused on financial management from the time the council was established on 1 July 2016, with a particular emphasis on the lack of action taken by the governing body on the revenue side in response to well understood challenges. That chapter commenced with an understanding of the background and context of council's financial position, which was not strong. And that was clearly recognised when council staff came to prepare the first long-term financial plan that was ultimately adopted in December 2016. The plan recognised the financial situation facing council was unsustainable, a matter that needed to be addressed in a responsible and prudent manner. As a result, it proposed and the governing body adopted a cost recovery approach described as optimistic but achievable. That approach sought to ensure that the cost of core services of telecommunications, electricity, sewage, waste, and the airport were met and funded through their operations, including provision for asset renewal. Asset renewal was critical since council's assets were mainly in a poor to very poor condition, with nearly all critical assets approaching the end of their useful life. At best, they required significant maintenance. At worst, they were physically unsound and beyond rehabilitation. The cost of maintaining ageing assets was significant, and although poorly understood, the cost of replacing them well exceeded the existing cash reserves. Against this background, the $9.4 million cash reserve that the council inherited from the administration, although probably sufficient to fund continuing operations, was not sufficient to enable the NERC to repair, maintain and replace the assets and the infrastructure that were also inherited. The Audit Committee gave the same message, that in an efficient, responsible council, deficits in operations should be paid for by the setting of special rates, fees and charges, and through productivity efficiencies. The fundamental matter to emerge from Chapter 5 is that the governing body, despite the repeated advice of council staff and the Audit Committee, was never prepared to implement the essential element of the plan. Another failure to deliver effective financial and asset management is also reflected in the failure to establish a rates target. Whilst one can understand the reluctance of the governing body to embrace rates on Norfolk Island, that did not excuse them from giving effect to the principles of sound financial management prescribed by the Applied Local Government Act 1993, New South Wales, Norfolk Island. The end result of council's rates policy was that rates levied on the proportion of total revenues was always under 5%, not 10%, which the Audit Committee recommended, and which the former chair of the Audit Committee said in her evidence to the inquiry is comparable to the rates levied by other councils. Although extra income of this order would not have solved all of the council's financial problems, it would have made council more sustainable over the long term. I'm still quoting from the Commissioner. Council's own source revenue as a percentage of total revenue decreased from 81.7% in 2016-17 to around 70% in 2019-20. Meaningful action was not taken by the governing body to reverse that trend. In all of these critical funding areas outlined in detail in Chapter 5, the governing body of the NERC failed to deliver effective financial and asset management. In my opinion, that is the Commissioner's opinion, the governing body was reluctant to raise sufficient own source revenue to pay their way and thereby enable, or at least move towards enabling, a truly balanced budget to be achieved. One result of this was that in the case of the net operating result for operations each year, excluding capital grants and unusual items, proposed capital expenditure was regularly carried forward owing to council having insufficient funds in that year to complete capital works. This ongoing inability to fund capital work was ultimately used to justify proceeding with the roads project, which followed and asserted underspend of $1.9 million in the total roads capital budget over the first 3 years of the council. Further, even though the NERC was nevertheless able to develop a long-term resourcing and financial strategy, Once it became clear that the assumptions underpinning those plans were not going to be achieved, in particular, the assumed level of capital grant funding and level of own source revenue obtained through the business units and other fees and charges, the NERC and governing body failed to take action to correct the situation. This is most clearly reflected in Council's failure to respond when Council was unable to secure the projected capital expenditure grants contained in the plan that included $5 million per annum for necessary capital replacement works. Without that funding, there was little scope in the long-term financial plan to enable the sort of asset repair, renewal and replacement that was required to give the state of Council's, given the state of Council's assets and infrastructure. Against that background, action was required by the governing body to consider options to increase its own source revenue sources and to make appropriate adjustments to its long-term strategy. The Council adopted a strategy to address the poor state of the assets. It was underpinned by a number of assumptions, and those assumptions were not borne out. The problem was compounded by less than expected revenue and departures by the NERC from the long-term financial strategies adopted by it. This resulted in the deferral of critical work. In the result, the Council's assets remain, by and large, in a state of disrepair. Chapter 7 of the Commissioner's report, which deals with the cash crisis from 2019 to January 2021, follows on from the problems identified in each of chapters 5, which was about financial performance management and reporting, and chapter 6, which was about asset management, and focuses upon the collapse of Council's cash position following the decisions about the airport and roads project. At the broadest level of generality, these decisions of the governing body bring into focus the failure to engage with the revenue problems and a failure to assess and manage financial risk that were well known and understood by the governing body. Council's failure to engage with its audit committee and apply its risk management policy in considering these critical decisions allowed the combined effect of both the airport and roads decisions to seriously impair Council's financial sustainability, as Chapter 7 describes. Although the COVID-19 pandemic magnified the effect of these decisions on the Council's financial position, it was not the primary cause, particularly in light of Council's failure to take necessary steps to raise revenue to fully recover its costs and maintain sufficient cash reserves to provide for contingencies. So there I will leave the Commissioner's report, and the remainder of the words are now mine. In the context of the Commissioner's criticisms of Council outlined above, the 2022-2023 Operational Plan and Revenue Policy needed to reorient Council's revenue trajectory, including new revenue measures aimed at delivering responsible financial management. Later in this preamble, I will announce changes to the makeup of the rates and charges, resulting from a generous $1 million subsidy agreement with the Australian Government. That is $200,000 towards rates and $800,000 towards waste management charges to apply in 2022-2023 that will cushion their immediate impact for ratepayers, enabling Council to stage the necessary increases over a longer time frame. I want to make a comment about Council services. Without a Commonwealth bailout, the financial implosion that Council faced towards the end of 2020 would have put at risk every service that council delivered. The value of these services far exceeds the amount collected in rates. They include services which as council included road upgrades and repairs, park upgrades and maintenance, library services, radio transmission, phone and internet services, liquor bond, tourism promotion, airport operations, fire brigade services, electricity generation and distribution, waste management services, water and sewerage maintenance, lighterage services, quarry services, advocacy, governance and administration, accommodation services for Queensland service staff, that is your teachers and your hospital. And under the SDA, the Service Delivery Agreement, council provides services of registrar of probates, courts, tribunals and boards, registry and licensing, emergency management, Carver payroll and HR management, work health and safety, public health, provision of gaming services, ports management, records management, and spatial policy and planning. Ask for silence, please. So they are some of the many services that council provides. Now, in relation to public submissions, council has received some 432 written submissions on the 2022-2023 draft operational plan and revenue policy. As was their democratic right, one local group organised a community rally against the rates increase, offering to provide the community with everything you need to write your submission: guides, templates, pens, paper, and people to help on hand. As a consequence, we received many submissions. I've looked at all of these submissions and I've met with individual submitters, either during the exhibition period or through the public access sessions, gaining insight into their submission and the community's impressions about the proposed revenue policy and the rates and charges. These have assisted me to formulate council's decisions today. At the outset, I will restate what I said last year. Council must and should raise sufficient funds to deliver fundamental services that the community needs and which they enjoy collectively. This approach aligns with the conclusions of the public inquiry report that I have just relayed to you. I also said last year that rates and charges are a tax on the community to deliver services. They're not rent. They're a contribution towards local service delivery. My appointment as administrator is made under the Local Government Act 1993, New South Wales, Norfolk Island. That legislation is effectively the foundation for council's governance, including its revenue framework. Many submitters called for different ways of funding NERC, including the introduction of some form of GST in lieu of land rates and charges. These suggestions go far beyond my powers as NERC's administrator. I have to apply the foundational legislation that currently applies to Norfolk Island. While the imposition of higher rates and charges is never warmly embraced anywhere that I know of, the extent of resentment that pervades here seems to have been exacerbated by notions of local sovereignty and a view of island history held by people of apparent influence, including within the rally organisers referred to above, who assert that Norfolk Island is not subject to the jurisdiction of the Australian government and that the imposition of any form of rates or charges under Australian laws is ultra vires. Although that view was reinforced to me in public access only yesterday, it's not for me to adjudicate, and it did not receive any weight in my deliberations. Now, about the Commonwealth subsidy. During the submission period, talks were ongoing between Council and Australian Government representatives, both on island and in Canberra, and an agreement has been reached which, in response to community feedback and the ongoing impacts of COVID-19, achieves the following. The Australian Government and NERC remain committed to working together for the long-term sustainable governance of the Norfolk Island community. Proposed increases in rates and waste management charges were outlined in the NERC 2022-2023 Draft Operational Plan and Revenue Policy, which was released for public comment on the 24th of May and is up for consideration at this council meeting on the 6th of July. The Australian Government and the Norfolk Island Regional Council have agreed the proposed increases in land rates and waste management will now be staggered over multiple financial years. The proposed increases in rates and waste management charges will now be phased in, and the Commonwealth will provide $1 million of additional funding in the 2022-2023 financial year to support this staged introduction. Under the revised plan, which Mr. Roach has just proposed to me, the revenue raised through rates and waste management charges in 2022-2023 will be limited to a 25% increase on the total rates and waste management charges calculations. The introduction of rating subcategories means that rates will now be distributed in a more equitable and sustainable way. The Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories, Kristy McBain MP, has been discussing the community's concerns with me and has said to me that she has heard the community's concerns loud and clear and empathised with the challenges people were facing in adjusting to the changes. She told me that the past few years have been incredibly difficult for so many people and that she understands the impacts COVID-19 has had on individuals and businesses. We have agreed that the community needs additional time to plan and budget for these increases in rates and waste management charges. The Minister is working on progressing other initiatives which would support sustainable waste management on Norfolk Island and assist delivery of waste and recycling services. She's planning on visiting Norfolk Island in coming weeks and we'll have more to share on this soon. For the reasons described above, rates and charges need to increase in the financial years ahead so the community can continue to receive essential services and improvements to available services. Numerous submitters asserted the proposed percentage increase in rates and waste management charges were excessive compared with New South Wales councils that are subject to the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, known as IPART, which, as they point out, set a 0.7% permissible increase for 2022-2023 for New South Wales. The assertion by the submitters fails to understand the separate special rate variation process that enables the standard IPART approved permissible rate increase to be exceeded, which happens frequently. It also fails to comprehend that rates and charges on Norfolk Island are starting off a very low base compared to New South Wales councils. As the public inquiry concluded, council's exceptionally low own source revenue level reflected a failure to take up the revenue opportunities available to it. This approach resulted in virtual insolvency by December 2020. Some submitters argued that the $500,000 surplus proposed for 2022-2023 is excessive. There should be no misunderstanding that this level of surplus is necessary to move council towards the recommended unrestricted cash level for council, the working capital necessary to run the business. No business can operate without working capital. In December 2020, council was experiencing a cash crisis. In fact, it was about to run out of cash altogether. When I was approached in December 2020 by the Australian government to undertake the interim administrator's role, I was informed that without a government bailout, council would become insolvent by the following week. The situation was and still is profoundly serious. It is a direct result of council spending more than it earned. Council's financial situation cannot be passed off as all fixed in December 2020, as some submitters imply. The Norfolk Island community is extremely fortunate that the Australian government rescued NERC from insolvency. Insolvency would have imperilled every service that the community enjoys from NERC. The community needs to accept some of the responsibility for ensuring that NERC is adequately resourced. But we appreciate people need more time for this to occur. The additional Australian government subsidy will allow a staged introduction of rates and waste management charges over the years ahead so the community can prepare for the changes. It's important to note that in 2022-2023, most residential properties will see a decrease in their rates and waste management charges compared with the original proposal. Businesses will be able to plan for increases to be passed on to visitors as needed. Now, regarding waste management charges, again, this year, the waste management charge has had the most commentary in the submissions from the community. During detailed conversations with those that met with me last year, I received some sound suggestions. There was a strong focus on the efficiencies that council could achieve by changing or improving our service delivery arrangements at the Waste Management Centre. Our General Manager has taken these suggestions on board and has made changes over the past 12 months. But that aside, I need to make clear what our decision regarding the proposed increase in waste management charges was about. We're addressing the situation of waste management here on Norfolk Island. It was impossible to align the past practice of dumping waste into the ocean with Norfolk's stated aspiration to be the best small island in the world. Following the fee introduced as a first step last year, differential charges are proposed for the next year. Our process is maturing and we will continue to make changes as we develop. This will, silence please. This will lead to reductions in costs through better management of existing processes, and we have already ended disposal into the ocean at Headstone. Importantly, Council has committed to new initiatives over the short and medium term to better deal with one of the community's biggest challenges. During my meetings with submitters, a constant theme was raised around the levying of waste charges on an accommodation sector with uncertain and at times very low occupancy rates. The most comprehensive submission I received around waste management was from the ATA. I accept the ATA's assertion that there will be little downstream revenue for anyone if the tourism sector is not viable. They put a considerable amount of time and thinking into their submission, and I want to publicly thank them for this. The $800,000 Australian government subsidy that I've referred to above will result in a significant reduction in the waste management charges for not only the accommodation sector, but all sectors from those originally proposed. For example, the Australian government subsidy enables the waste management charge for the accommodation sector to be reduced from $746 to $139 per room. Although most submitters seem to understand the rating and charging impacts stated in NERC's documentation, some mistook total revenue figures for one or other rating subcategories for the rates and charges applicable to their own property. This mistake produced some astounding interpretations that you relayed to me in submissions and in the public access sessions. While some got it, others obviously did not. And I apologise if NERC's documentation contributed to these misunderstandings. The charges in the operational plan strike a balance between the resident and visitor populations. Most business enterprises of the council, being electricity, telecom and wastewater services, will now deliver small surpluses. This is crucial to pay for much needed capital replacement works or to fund upgrades that are occurring. A clear message I received from the community through the submission process last year was a plea to reduce expenditure from shutting services down, improving productivity, removing positions that are not needed and outsourcing. Council did exactly that within the 2021-22 budget by setting a target for the General Manager to achieve a 5% efficiency gain and 5% service review. Although a difficult challenge equating to millions of dollars, this was achieved during the past year. And finally, communication was raised by many submitters. It's incumbent on Council to be open, honest and transparent in its dealings with the community. This year, the draft 2022-2023 operational plan received extensive media coverage, including in Norfolk Online, in the Norfolk Islander, on the NERC website, and through the Norfolk Fuss special edition. The sheer number and overall quality of the submissions received demonstrates that the community was well informed about the contents of the drafts, and particularly about their revenue impacts from rates and charges. Notwithstanding that, Council will redouble its efforts to communicate effectively with the community in 2022-2023, starting with communications about the most appropriate way forward for future rates and charges. Once again, this year there is a very full program ahead for the Council team, and one that will continue to address our financial position in line with the Commonwealth's requirements of my appointment. I'll be writing to everyone who made a submission on the 2022-2023 operational plan and revenue policy to thank them for their genuine interest in NERC's future success. And finally, this preamble will be incorporated into the minutes of this council meeting. So in relation to item 9.1, I resolve, 1, that Council notes the submissions of the public exhibition of the draft delivery program 2022-2026 and operational plan 2022-2023 as listed in part 1 of the enclosure to this agenda. 2, that Council endorses the recommended changes to the draft delivery program 2022-2026 and operational plan 2022-2023 outlined in part 2 of the enclosure. 3, that Council adopts the delivery program 2022-2026 and operational plan 2022-2023 included the changes in part 2 of the enclosure. 4, that council delegates to the General Manager the power to make grammatical and formatting changes to the Delivery Plan 2022-2026 and Operational Plan 2022-2023, if required, after their adoption by Council and prior to publishing the documents for public access. And 5, that Council approves the 2022-2023 budget and proposed expenditure as detailed in the operational plan. B, makes and levies the following ordinary rates in accordance with section 534, section 535 and 537 of the Local Government Act 1993 as amended for the 2022-2023 financial year, incorporating the farmland, residential and business categories as listed on pages 34 and 34 to 41 of the agenda for today's meeting, and numbered in the table 1 to 23 and Roman numerals 1 to 23. Also resolve, or the resolution includes the setting of waste management charges. In accordance with section 501 of the Local Government Act 1993, New South Wales, Norfolk Island, and as detailed in table 1, subcategories, rates and waste management charges. Interest charge on overdue rates and charges. In accordance with the provisions of section 566 of the Local Government Act 1993, New South Wales, Norfolk Island, the interest rate to apply on overdue rates and charges for the period from 1 July 21 to 30 June 22. Should that be 22 to 23? Sorry, 1 July 22 to 30 June 23 will be the maximum rate of 6%. Interest on overdue debtors. The interest rate to apply to overdue debtors for the period 1 July 22 to 30 June 2023 will be the maximum rate of 6%. And then item 6 of the resolution is that the plans once adopted, or the plans now adopted, be placed on the council's website and a copy provided to the department. Mr. General Manager, is there anything else that I need to cover in relation to item 9.1?
No, that's extensive.
Thank you. So resolved, and I'll move now to item 9.2, which is a report on the annual report for 2020-2021. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. This report did come to you at the June meeting, and we had to make some changes. Those changes have now been completed, and it's now provided to you with the updates that were discussed and ready for adoption.
Thank you. We did discuss the detail of this report when it came to an earlier meeting. So I accept the revised version, and I resolve that 1, Council adopt the draft 2020-2021 Norfolk Island Regional Council Annual Report. 2, Council delegates to the General Manager the power to make minor grammatical and formatting changes to the 2020-2021 Norfolk Island Regional Council Annual Report, if required, after its adoption by Council and prior to publishing the document for public access. 3, Council notes the general purpose financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2021. 4, that the progress report on the 2020-2021 delivery program and operational plan be received and noted. And 5, a copy of the 2020-2021 annual report be posted on Council's website and provided to the department. And I'll move now to item 9.3. which is a report on the sea freight solution, NERC and community requirements. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. I'll try and do some talking for you now. For the past few years, Council has been unable to source a reliable and regular sea freight solution for general operations and project cargoes. So operational improvements to infrastructure such as roads, buildings and parks are constrained by logistics, either by weight, size or certainty. Similarly, projects cannot be commenced or finished due to regular delays in supplies to the island, with this also being the case for the wider community. Furthermore, Council cannot meaningfully engage in the economic development across tourism, retail or agriculture unless a reliable sea freight service can be sourced. Whilst Council continues to explore a safer port at Cascade and a roll-on, roll-off solution at that we have discussed earlier for Ball Bay, a short-term measure needs to be put in place. Any solution to provide a safer working harbour is at least 2 years away from the regulatory framework that is now in place by the Department of Ag, Water and Marine, which I think the department's now changed its name again. Security of regular freight to any remote region is paramount for community confidence, growth and the general livability index. Identified as extremely remote, there are many benefits to securing regular sea freight to the Norfolk Island community. Council, with the assistance of an external consultant, have been investigating several options to engage with a shipping company to supply a vessel for a period of 2 years. This followed detailed assessment of the wider Pacific market and, more importantly, what vessel can operate with the existing infrastructure without having to spend money on that. We've found a solution and it's owned and operated by a Western Australian company called Guardian Offshore AU. The appropriate name vessel is the MV Solution and it's currently located on the east coast of Australia. Council's in the process of negotiating, or what we're putting towards you now is a draft, so it still requires more negotiation, but it's exclusive charter for the use of supply to Norfolk Island. The contract is directly with NERC for a period of 2 years, so it's the island's vessel for everybody to use. It can't be run off to other places. The vessel can carry the equivalent of 14 to 15 20-foot containers to and from the island. It is proposed to run 15 services from Brisbane per year and 15 services from New Zealand. The ship can unload without the need of the traditional light tube setup, so it would push right next to Cascade Pier. This will provide approximately 10,000 tonne of cargo to Norfolk, which represents 2/3 of the island's needs from pre-2020. That was when the Capitan Wallis used to service the island. Currently, only 1/3 of this need is being met by the Southern Tiara. So we've had at least 2 years down, 2/3 down per year. Council will backload its waste to Brisbane for a 40% reduction in current costs of air freight and no restrictions of what type of waste, which is restricted with air services, such as batteries and oils and things that won't be transported in the air. Council can sell additional backloading both to Australia and New Zealand. Council can bring its project plan immediately to Island, which is the jet patcher, fixing the roads, drilling rig, which is desperately required for our newly approved quarry at Cascade, and blasting equipment, which we can't fly in. Council will make available to the community 75 to 80% of each of the Australian voyages to local businesses and 95% of the New Zealand voyages. This will be managed through a local freight forwarder, as this is not Council's core business. And there's 3 local freight forwarders that we can approach. Council will provide a guaranteed transport solution to all Commonwealth government operations and projects, including infrastructure, national parks, health and education. Realigning Commonwealth government transport cost allocations, which will be mutually beneficial to both government and community. And Council have the ability to on-sell the vessel to private charter in the event that the community decides not to take it up at any given point.
There's pictures of the MV solution in the thing, but what I need to highlight to you, Mr. Administrator, is there is a significant risk for council in securing this service for its use, but more importantly, the community's use. Whilst a contract for 2 years provides significant certainty to an area that has very little certainty over the last 3 years, this financial exposure is extreme. As such, I would be recommending to you, Mr. Administrator, that I believe that the significant financial risk for council should they sign the current contract without contracted local commitment, we should mitigate this by written support from the department. That being considered, I believe there are significant benefits by securing a freight service from both Australia and New Zealand for a 2-year period, whilst a longer term solution can be found, because we just don't have anything at present. This certainly will bring confidence to the local economy and possibly allow it to expand during the time. So happy to take any questions from you, Mr. Administrator, but as I said, this is a first step towards finding a solution. One thing that I forgot to point out is, whilst I'm asking for 2 years, what we've negotiated with the ship's owner is a trial of 2 runs. And if the first 2 runs work, then we would go down a path of negotiating for a 2-year contract. But what we're trying to do is see if this works, show the community it works, and then that should build confidence for us to head down this path. So what we're seeking is the ability to negotiate for a trial of two runs. And if that works out, then we negotiate for a longer period of 2 years. But we can't do that unless we get the backing of the Commonwealth Government to mitigate the financial risk should the local community not take up the space on the ship.
And I see in the recommendation that you cover the risk by the inclusion of an underwriting proposal from the government, between council and the Australian government, to cover not just the 2-year term of the contract, but also the trial period.
The trial as well.
Thank you. Mr. General Manager, I share your concerns about the risk. This is something that, if it works out, would produce extremely worthwhile outcomes for council and for the Norfolk Island community. But it is not something, and I've spoken at great length earlier in the meeting about council's precarious financial position. This is not something that council would be in a position to do if it were required to bear all of the financial risk associated with it. It needs to be successful to break even, and the risk is too great for council to take on its own, and therefore needs to be underwritten. So I see the recommendation covers that. I accept that this is extremely worthwhile, subject to the underwriting arrangements. And I resolve, 1, that subject to securing financial support to underwrite the proposed sea freight service from the Department of Infrastructure, Regional Development, Local Government and Territories for the initial trial period of 2 voyages, and then, if successful, for a 2-year term of the proposed service contract. Council instructs the General Manager to negotiate contractual terms with Guardian Offshore AU for the sea freight services, and Council instructs the General Manager to negotiate terms of engagement for a local freight forwarding firm to manage the sale of space for the initial trial, and then, if successful, for 15 voyages from Australia and 15 from New Zealand each year for 2 years. And 2, that once the above terms are agreed, council inform the community of the arrangements. And I'll move now to item 9.4, which is a report on performance review for peak services. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. From Resolution 2021/140, we formally engaged peak services for a period of 12 months to provide support in areas of governance, finance, workplace health and safety, human resources, communication and procurement. The contract was signed in late October, but with a few, juggling mechanisms around the pandemic and travel requirements, the contract really didn't take full flight until about February 22. Some of the achievements that we've seen in the first 4 to 5 months of the operations are quite considerable. One in particular was around the financial bank reconciliations. When we first asked Pete to look at it, there was some 30,000 transactions that sat in a suspense account. I still don't know how that was signed off by the auditors, but in that period of time, we've gone from over 30,000 to around 30 transactions that haven't been dealt with yet. So that was a considerable amount of work done in a short space of time. We've also reviewed something like 26 former policies of the administration of Norfolk Island and transferred them into council policies. That's a pretty significant piece of work when policies have been trying to change. There's also a new industry-leading systems-based governance reporting solution, which I've given you a demonstration of. And it's now setting up so that systems are improving the accuracy, effectiveness and ultimate performance across the entire organisation. Financial reporting has improved considerably with both being on time, but it's also being accurate. And we have some confidence now that our management team has some good financial data to start making better decisions. Accounts payable systems have been improved, but a big significant step was the development of a port safety management plan, which was had expired, and there was no one in council that could actually do the work. So we've managed to pull that off. Communications have taken a pretty large step in this period of time with social media. We've got considerable active postings that are happening in that area, but also the development of the Norfolk Fuss, which is now distributed to over 1,400 emails on island and off island, people that are interested in receiving. What this arrangement has proven to me over the past 5 to 6 months of operations is opportunity to drive change in an organisation that wasn't able to establish it in the first place. Many of the external audit findings identified this as an inhibitor because we just didn't have the resource to drive that change. And this model is certainly addressing this long list of challenges in this space. The next quarterly report will be more along the lines of a report card, and it'll have KPIs and show to you in data type representation. And it's intended that this next report will be presented to you in October at the October ordinary meeting. Because this has been so successful and we've still got considerable change to get through in those lists of EAFs and also additional changes driving from the conclusions of the public inquiry, I'm recommending to you, based on the success of this that we've seen to date, to extend the existing contract with Peak Services for a period of 3 years, which aligns with your administration. This will secure the team at Peak that Peak have built to service this council needs during to date, whilst securing continuity of service to finish the majority of projects that we've commenced in the first year, and so that we don't have to go through a retraining process of losing those resources. This will see significant improvement in work product and in turn continue to provide considerable savings to the Norfolk Island community.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Look, I know you have touched on quite a number of points that probably provide part of the answer to the question I'm about to ask. Through the many submissions that we received on the operational plan documents, there were numerous mentions which indicated to me that there is a level of resentment out there in the community against council's practice of engaging Peak Services people, or people from the mainland, not just Peak, but Peak and other consultants, to do work for council. Now, you have touched on some of the benefits of what Peak are delivering. I just wonder if you, first of all, if I could ask you to comment on, whether there is room, whether that resentment should really exist if council went to more trouble to explain to the community why we need to do this and the value and benefits that we get from it. And if the answer to that is yes, I'd like you to commit to me to some way, perhaps through the Norfolk Fuss or some other way, of making sure that we engage with the community so we create an understanding and gather support for what we're doing rather than just let the resentment fester. So your comments on that, please.
Yeah, look, a good example of this is, and it was highlighted through the public inquiry, that council went through 6 CFOs in a period of 3.5 years. Now that's an average of somewhere between 6 and 9 months. And so, having been a CFO myself for previous roles, it takes you a good 6 months to actually know what the job is. And it looked as though people came into the job, saw what it was like, and then left after 6 months. And so they had this continual churn through the organisation, and they had no continuity. Hence, that perfect example of 30,000 transactions sitting in a suspense account, which was several years of work not being done, or no one knowing how to fix that work. Now, there is plenty of work on island that we can give to locals that are more suited to the skill base that's here. I'm sure if we could find a CFO that could do that work and they wanted to live on island, then we would bring them here. But I think it's quite a shift. It's a shift in the industry across local government, is that they are struggling to find professional people who want to be away from the cities or away from their families or away from whatever. And this model allows us to have the service done at probably at a higher level of professionalism, but at a much lower cost, because council's only engaging the majority of these people for 80% compared to 100% on the island. So that 20% saving that we're making, we can shift back into people who can work on benefiting the local community more. So you can give more roles for roads and parks, or even for contractors on island to do that work. And that's what we're trying to do, is shift money that would have been lost from the continual churn. So those 6 CFOs that we went through, we had to pay $10,000 plus for relocation, plus another $5,000 for flights, etc. And then on top of that, there was the interview process, which was somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 each time. That money's lost every single time. And in the report, we highlight that I estimated we'd save about $125,000 in the first 6 months. We've actually saved $167,000, which means it's money this community hasn't spent leaving the island, it's stayed here. And there will be a time where we will be able to focus engaging more local contractors and employing more people here that can do the services that are required here. Because some of these local government services are very specific and require years and years of experience to get them done. So that's probably the best way that we can explain to the community of why we've done this.
Okay. So would you support me if I was to say to the community, and particularly those people who are listening to this, that there is no deliberate strategy of taking jobs from Norfolk and transferring them to the mainland, that where that happens, either through consultancies or through the use of this arrangement with Peak Services, it's largely responding to the need to acquire services which are not immediately available on island because of a lack in those particular skill areas of available candidates for that work. Is that what we're doing?
100%.
Okay.
And happy to support that.
Okay. And so I would really like to see that message go out to the community, that is our strategy.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. So I'll resolve that Council 1 receives and notes the first report from Peak Services on the provision of local government services for NERC. 2, approves the General Manager to have delegated authority to negotiate terms to extend the arrangement with Peak Services for a further 3 years, and 3 requests quarterly reports to be presented to council in a report card format. And I will move to item 10.1, which is the NERC investment report as at 31 May 2022. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. The purpose of this report is to note the investments held and provide an overview of council's cash position as at 31 May 2022. As you can see in the middle of page 80, at the bottom of page 85, our unrestricted cash is sitting at 5.2 million, which shows a very small variation from the report we presented to you at the end of April.
Thank you. Well, we seem to remain on track with our projections for 30 June 2022. So thank you for the report. And I resolve the council notes the information provided in the report. So I'll move now to item 13.1, which is a report on DABA 40/2021 amended. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Administrator, this is a report that needed to come to you, which is outside of my delegations. It's for a LM bowler and RM bowler, and it's for it's at Ferny Lane for an uninhabitable shed, which has encroachment into the minimum rear and side boundary setbacks. So the report that's before you today is recommending to refuse the DA because of its encroachment into this area.
Thank you. I accept the reasons for refusal that are outlined in the report, and I resolve that 1, the Norfolk Island Regional Council, pursuant to section 44(2) of the Planning Act 2002, Norfolk Island, makes a recommendation to refuse amended DABA 40/2021 described below for the reasons presented in the recommended notice of decision. The applicant is LM and RN Bowler. Subject land is portion lot 128, section 27, portion 35F5, size 72, Ferny Lane. The zoning is mixed use and it's for 1 uninhabitable shed encroaching into the minimum rear boundary and side boundary setbacks. And 2, that the Norfolk Island Regional Council, pursuant to section 44(4) of the Planning Act 2002, Norfolk Island, refers the amended DABA 40/2021 to the Minister's Delegate with Council's recommendations on the application. And I'll move now to item 14, which is, or item 14.1, which is a report on the Community Strategic Plan Grant Program. Mr. GM.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is a report detailing a process that we've gone through calling on the local community to apply for a grant program which closed on the 26th of May. We're recommending that 3 organisations, the Norfolk Island Girl Guides, receive a grant of $5,000. Norfolk Island Sustainability Hub receives a grant of $4,991, and the Norfolk Island Conservation Volunteers receives a grant of $1,109. The community grants program is normally $61,300 for the year. This total funding that we have before you for the 3 applications that we received that were eligible totals $11,100.
And have we spent any funds prior to this report?
Yeah, the grant, the total funds was normally about $100,000, and last month you were awarded the university bursaries, which came out, and that's
from the same source.
Same source. So that was 100 back to 61,300. So
thank you. These are all worthwhile projects, and I resolve that council approve the funding for the 3 applications outlined in the table below. That is $5,000 to the Norfolk Island Girl Guides to construct a disability access ramp to the Girl Guide Hall, $4,991 to the Norfolk Island Sustainability Hub for procurement of IT equipment for the Norfolk Island Sustainability Hub building, and $1,109 to the Norfolk Island Conservation Volunteers for the purchase of tools to be used in the eradication of Madeira vine in 100 acres. That brings us to item 15. I note there are no notices of motion. Mr. GM, is there any urgent business without notice?
And not this month.
Thank you. There are no confidential matters for discussion. There are no questions for the next council meeting. Is there anything else I need to attend to, Mr. General Manager?
No, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. Then I close the meeting at 3:15 p.m. and I thank everyone for their attendance.